Peri is one of the most frustrating companions to talk about because, much like the Sixth Doctor, in concept she has potential to be one of the very best, essentially jumping in with the Doctor before they had a chance to form a rapport or healthy dynamic, only to be thrust into one of the most traumatic adventures the Doctor's ever been through that winds up causing him physical and emotional damage, and Peri, somewhat feeling responsible for that, decides to become his unofficial carer whilst having to deal with his emotional outbursts and inability to keep control of his actions and morals. And no sooner do they manage to finally find that rapport and start getting on good terms again, tragedy strikes and they're separated. Now, in theory, that concept sounds fairly interesting, but in execution, it's pretty clear that Eric Saywood cared even less about Peri than he did about the Sixth Doctor. At least the Doctor, you can somewhat salvage a character arc from his TV run. Peri, it's a lot harder because she's often a victim of trauma, and sometimes from the Sixth Doctor himself. The stories make it quite clear that what he's doing isn't intentional. He's not hurting her of his own free will, but I don't think they necessarily do enough to establish that that doesn't make it okay. We get hints of that in the Twin Dilemma and Mind Warp, but realistically, I think we need a little bit more moments of them discussing this arc properly, because otherwise it ran the risk of people thinking this is just aimless bickering and somewhat abusive behaviour. A lot of people tend to exaggerate how irredeemable the Sixth Doctor is and how meek Peri is, but I'll also concede, as a Big Finish fan, I am a little too forgiving of some aspects of their relationship because of the retroactive context it gave them. For example, I don't mind her adventures with the Fifth Doctor and Aramem, because having somewhat of a relationship before he regenerates, I think gives her more incentive to stay, because she knows the Doctor is capable of getting his senses back, and so I'm more willing to let those episodes exist in canon. Plus, outside of Necromantia, they're pretty good. And I appreciate that Big Finish does a good job in at least trying to reinforce what's already in the TV series rather than just inventing stuff. We get to see hints of her potentially staying with the Doctor out of compassion rather than fear, especially considering the Doctor does offer to take her home at multiple points. And you also have her reunion with the Sixth Doctor after Trial of a Time Lord, where the time apart puts them in a better mental state, where he is more mellow and she is more mature. With that said, I do think there's a decent chunk of moments where they are able to talk to each other normally and get on during their TV run, especially in Trial of a Time Lord, but they still have a little way to go. And of course, Mind Warp is very much a case of forcing the Doctor to face the consequences of his actions and justify his behaviour with Peri, and each time he slowly begins to realise just because he has an excuse it doesn't make it okay, and then ultimately she almost ends up paying the price. Personally, I'm one of the few people who prefers that Peri lived, not only because you have the reunion, but the idea of her dying so he can learn a lesson is a bit too far for me. So while I agree the TV era for Peri wasn't great and has a few too many moments where she's unfairly treated without much consequence, but I do think it's a little better than people give credit for. I will always maintain that the worst problem with the infamous attack scene in the Twin Dilemma isn't the scene itself, it's the lack of a significant aftermath. It's so unfair that the TV series didn't take advantage of this complex relationship, instead just treating her as this voyeuristic marketing tool.